This is Lisalee and welcome to my channel. So today we are doing a reading on forgiveness, because what is it? We throw a word around like there's a level of certainty, but I do these readings and forgiveness comes through and I'm like, Spirit, what exactly? I understand it's a technology of release, but give me all the... So we're going to just take a deep dive on that, and I'm going to go ahead and begin the shuffle. All right, so let's take a look and see what's here. The first thing that I'm noticing that's kind of like throwing me off a little bit is that I expected this to be very oriented around forgiveness, and it seems to be very heavily rooted in trust. And sort of like, yeah, that makes sense in terms of how things work, but with the throat chakra here, there's almost like a mystery to be solved in this spread. So we're just gonna go on a little journey. Let's start with these cards. Like, I'm going to pair these. I would usually go down, but I'm led to pair these. And so with the underworld and the shaman, let's take a look here. Actually, let's one at a time. So this is a card that is, it's about facing like the deepest, darkest fears. It's about the nightmares. It's about the stuff that we don't want to believe exists or is real. What does that mean? You know, like we all like step into, Spirit is showing me, you know, there's no light without dark. There's no dark without light. And then I'm seeing scenes from nature shows I've been watching. So this is like kind of an interesting thing. And the scenes from the nature shows I've been watching, like the hawk gets the bunny and then eats the bunny. And what Spirit is saying is, you know, confronting the underworld and confronting your worst fears is understanding like a cycle in life that actually requires like, you know, lots of rounds of life and death and life and death and life and death. And I'm hearing that the universe provides like a backdrop of like how we're supposed to understand the way things work when we look at nature. And so, you know, around the idea of forgiveness, Spirit is saying like so much of what forgiveness is a technology of is moving through like a life and death transformation kind of a place. It requires a letting go of imagined control. And often like with the underworld, like, you know, we confronted with the death of a loved one, confronted with something horrible, you know, that like changes the way things work out. Like there's just so much in the way of like, this is looking at your fear without any... It's like, it's looking at your fear of annihilation. It's looking at your fear of like being consumed. And so that's an interesting place that we're starting with this. But, you know, with the underworld and the shaman, the reason that these go together is because what Spirit is showing me is that, you know, at that moment of, there's, you know, Spirit keeps on saying the illusion of control. At the moment of dropping that illusion of control, that you can protect yourself from certain life and death cycles, that you can somehow keep everything around you as it is and not have to like move through that transformation. And Spirit is showing me the transformation's ongoing. Like you wake up every day and there's you know, this is ongoing and ongoing. And we have big, huge moments where it's major, but there's constantly a cycle of life and death. And we get stuck when we try to stay where we are. Or we're like in a moment where we want to keep that feeling forever, or we're with a person where we want it to be exactly like this forever. Even with opportunities, you know, you want it to come to you in this way and not be chopped up into these like different ways. And so Spirit is saying there's a release of control that is necessary with the life and death process that brings us into the realm of the shaman. And so when we look at the shaman card, it kind of is the knowledge of good and evil in a sense. You know, going back to like light and dark in the interplay of what I'm seeing is kind of overwhelming. So just a minute. Yeah, so Spirit is saying, you know, forgiveness is a technology of release, but it's very related to letting go of control. And so when we look at the shaman, this is a card of The shaman's actually a card of belief, bridging the underworld to where we are right now, you know, the world that we currently live in. And these nature shows that I've been watching, I keep on watching, like, you know, a dolphin, you know, eat a cute little fish, or, you know, or a hawk eat like an adorable baby bunny. I'm keeping watching these like nature shows where I'm like continually horrified by the fact that like that living like sentient beings like eat each other. And what I'm getting right now is like Spirit saying, like, when we look at nature, nature's telling us like that tells you that the flesh is a throwaway compared to the nature of the cycle. And that each being, like, you know, from ant to bee to butterfly to, like, matter changes, you know, like there's no loss of energy when something goes through the life and death phase. There's just like a change, and like maybe you become, there's like this fear of annihilation, but Spirit is saying you become a flower to a tree to a bird to a bee, to, you know, and you work your, and maybe like 1,000 lifetimes you get back up to that place of like reincarnating as a human again. And that this is like this huge fear, but Spirit says there's no time. So at that time, you understand that like that cycling through nature and like being like pulled into the whole of what it is, and then having these experiences one life after the other, like where there's just like a rapid turnover between like what is being born and what is being fed and what is being eaten, that that from that really intense process we can see that like don't take stock in the and you know the body is such a small and insignificant portion of what we experience in the way of transformation and eternity. And so like the fear of like losing control is related to the fear of death, and the fear of death is really a misunderstanding of nature as something that's supposed to just Spirit's saying like the flower doesn't know the difference between being in the sun or the frost. It just understands itself as having an experience. And so we go through a lot of that, but there's no time. So, you know, to die, to become earth, to become, you know, worms, to become, you know, a little sprout, to become a flower, to become a butterfly, like, you know, Spirit's showing me just like right up the ladder and then into another life as a human being with that information gained from the previous life and the cycle, which takes, Spirit says, a blink of an eye. The 1,000 lives in between the one where you're in and the one where you're going, related to like the way that nature sort of processes the turnover, it's a blink of an eye. And so Spirit is saying the shaman is like understanding that, like, you know, I don't like, you know, looking at death and the process of death and the process of change and being like, you're not my master. I don't serve you, I serve life. But part of life is understanding this wholeness. So I'm not sure if I'm butchering everything. The channel is coming through real strong. It's a lot of really tough concepts to articulate though. Because what Spirit is really showing me is like, you know, the technology of forgiveness is related to the technology of trust. Trust is about understanding your place in the world fundamentally. And understanding your place in the world fundamentally means that you accept that there's no control and that you can't have control. And that good and evil have a role to play with each other in a certain kind of dance related to the orphan and the vision. So let's move over to the orphan and the vision. And take a breath. Whew. All right, so you know, this is the state of abandonment. It's also like a place in the world that we are today where like we seem to have kind of, you know, there's enough of a system that's sort of like choking out life around us based on isolating, separating. You're by yourself. You've got no one. No one's here to help you. There is no God. You've already like gotten to that point of, I mean, and I'm not saying that there is no God, but it's just like that moment where you experience this feeling of like, what I understood to be true has to die in order for me to have an expanded understanding. And this even exists around these really painful states of isolation and loneliness, wherein our needs aren't met, wherein we find ourselves to be prey. So it's almost like Spirit is actually showing me back to the nature shows and being like, you know, that moment when you're the prey of the hawk, that moment when you are thrown out of the nest and you're either going to fly or you're going to hit the rock. But what Spirit is saying is, you know, that the illusion is that you're alone in this suffering, and that it's not some part of, and this message is coming through. I'm like listening and I'm like, Spirit, but that, you know, this seems so like such a wide lens. And I feel like we live in this space of like an understanding of ourselves as having to like work our way out and make these connections and understand why bad things happen to good people and work with our wounding. I mean, like there's so much around what it is to be in this orphaned position. And Spirit is saying that, you know, like being left alone with things or feeling like you are, because you never actually are, really makes you confront what you think of when you think of the system that holds you, because it doesn't. You know, when the system that holds you fails to hold you, Spirit's like, that's when we have a breakthrough related to you beginning to understand what you are in the larger scheme of things. You know, with the vision, we are all born, and the Spirit keeps on showing me like the cycles of life, you know, like we all have such an important message, like a seed that is planted very deeply, and that important message is related to two things: who we are and what we have to share with the whole as beings of consciousness. And so Spirit is saying that, you know, to find this vision, and I'm being like to show you this little mountain, and in this mountain is this light, and in this light is somebody standing. You know, there's an intense process of reckoning, like, you know, so this is like light and dark, you know, reckoning with the light and dark, reckoning with your place in it, and reckoning with the truth of who you are and what that tells you about what you've learned, and how that relates to the whole, because everyone's message, I'm drawn to, like, you know, this is a cool thing. The word Messiah actually means messenger. And so what Spirit is bringing through is we all have a message, and we all have a part to play in that message being the messenger, the Messiah. And like that's the grand awakening, you know, when we can all sort of find out, like, you know, be in a place of like seeing and understanding who we are and understanding what that message is related directly to purpose, and that purpose being part of like this, it's much bigger than you. It's all much bigger than you. And so for me as a reader, I'm sitting here and I'm being like, wow, like that sounds nothing like what I expected or wanted to come through in the way of like simple answers related to forgiveness, and the technology of forgiveness. But with harvest here, Spirit is absolutely saying that, you know, so much of what forgiveness is having to reckon with that wasn't fair, that was wrong, that is unconscionable, you know, the life and death cycle isn't fair, and it entails suffering. And again, I keep on seeing these like scenes from the nature show. There's 3 little birds that were born in the nest, and there's only enough food for 2 of them. That's not fair. That's inherently wrong. But the bird that falls out, that hasn't been properly fed, ends up being like the savior of the squirrel that moves by and is starving to death. And that's very weird, you know. And so Spirit is saying, like, the first thing to reckon with related to forgiveness is what suffering essentially is, and how we relate to that suffering as these things are against us. And Spirit says, I want you to kind of like that's almost like trying to like control this life and death cycle, you know, and say like, well, that's not okay. You know, this has to stay like this. This is wrong. You know, there's wrong and there's right. They're standing with right. No one's saying that you shouldn't. But to release someone from the captivity of you did this to me, you first have to come to a level of acceptance about how the world sometimes works in a way where it doesn't seem like there's justice. And Spirit is saying there is justice, and we're going to get there. But one of the first steps in being able to like open yourself up to be released through the technology of forgiveness is deciding the illusion of control, there is no control. And then being able to look at the world and say, there's a system of justice here that I don't understand. And it's in that acceptance that you kind of, that these things release. That's where forgiveness lives, in a place of, these are things I don't understand. So, I mean, and Spirit's almost saying like forgiveness isn't like showing me like a weighted scale. Forgiveness is almost like it lives in the village of I don't understand. And if you can't go into the village of I don't understand, you can't really get to forgiveness, because that's sort of part of the relinquishment related to letting things go. Because it's just, that's what it is. It's about letting things go and letting the person go, because you're holding the person accountable. They're not holding themselves accountable, and you can hold them accountable in yourself, wanting to hold them accountable forever. But that's taking something and wanting it to stay until it's fixed in a certain way. And Spirit says that's this illusion of control. And you're meant to regenerate, and you're meant to like let this die and let this be born again and release what is absolutely a part of the past that's going to teach you something, knowing that there's some harvest, you know, on the other side of this. So that's like really big. I want to look at these cards here. Family, wonder, and pause. So Spirit is showing me like we're born to relationships. One card at a time. We are born into relationships, and we are born into it like a sacred space relating to relationships. But where that sacred space relating to relationships is like actually the stuff that isn't Spirit, how in the heck do you want me to explain that? We're born to relationship. Relationship is wherein we like learn who we are. We understand who this vision is. We can't get this vision clear without relationship, and also being confronted in the ways in which relationship isn't or doesn't work. And Spirit says like we're meant for this connection, and we're born in a sacred space related to these connections with each other, but we're also born in the wilderness. Yeah, I keep on, you know, I don't know when this came through. I think I was talking to somebody, or it might have come through in a reading, but Spirit's showing me, you know, this very intense image once more. And so I'm not remembering where it came from, but I know that it's come through before channeling. So it's like this piece of paper, and on this piece of paper it says mother, and underneath it says, you know, it's a list of all the qualities of a good mother, and then on the other side there's a list of all the qualities of bad mother. And then Spirit is saying, I want you to like look at that mentally, look at that piece of paper, and I want you to draw a circle in between the two lists. And Spirit is saying that the question that I want you to write over the term mother is, who was the wild woman who led you through the forest? And then I want you to look at those lists and understand that that the expectation that all of those things can be met is corrosive to the whole. That's weird, and I don't get it as a reader, but that's what I was shown in somebody that's going to resonate for you. And so Spirit is basically saying, like, you know, when the structures around us fail, when it's a bad mom, and everything like falls into this, you know, I cannot connect, like there's problems with attachment, there's problems with this, there's problems with that, it's isolating, it's bad. Spirit says, like, let's like reframe this into a space of wilderness a little bit, because while these are sacred spaces within relationships, the wilderness beyond that relationship plays a really big role in setting the stage for our success and our failure. That's that space between the lists. And so like this is where Spirit is saying, like, you know, we spend a lot of time in this Nine of Swords energy, in this agony, in these nightmares, like, you know, trying to hold back the underworld or a knowledge of the underworld, which means that, you know, some things there are things that aren't fair, there are things that don't make sense, there are things that are wrong, there are things that are right, and there seems to be just chaos. And trying to like take a hold of this chaos by pointing fingers and saying, you know, here's the list of right, here's the list of wrong. Spirit says you're meant to be a judge and even like an arbitrator. Someone knows how to phrase that. But anyway, Spirit saying you wouldn't have a capacity for judgment if you weren't supposed to work with it as a tool. But when your entire life is dictated by a system of judgments that has you like in a position where you feel failed, by the system, like by how you're judging the situation. You feel failed by the situation. And Spirit says when you're in that moment, that's a moment when you look at the chaos, and instead of trying to judge it and come and put these things in these little places, Spirit says, because that's an illusion, that's not possible, to actually in a way kind of join the chaos. So Spirit's saying it's sort of about like being willing to join the chaos is sort of the same as like releasing control. And that's where wonder comes in. And so Spirit says, like, you know, instead of a position of the agony of trying to keep things together and hold it together and keep things in place, when you're confronted with these underworld positions, you know, because the system that was supposed to feed you failed to, and the system that was supposed to make sense didn't, brings you into this place of like the chaos of the bridge between worlds, and understanding that with this vision here, you know, Spirit's saying you're not really here for like a feel-good experience necessarily. That doesn't mean you shouldn't feel good. It means that the whole of the experience is, it's not like your whole goal is happiness. Spirit's saying your goal is the message, because each person finding their message, each person being their message, their own, having that messenger within, reveals to us in that like Savior Messiah way who we are. We're each a messenger. That's each a Messiah. And that entails actually going on a journey that creates, and Spirit is saying through many lives, that creates this knowledge of self, and therefore this knowledge of what the message, the meaning, like of the self. It's very complicated, and only I think like 4 people are going to understand me. Like this is really complex for even me to try to like. Spirit is smart. So anyway, with wonder, Spirit is saying, like, you know, I want you to step out of a place of trying to, like, there's a lamentation over chaos, and by joining the chaos, it's also like walking into this area, the village of I don't know and I don't understand, and with the childlike attitude of wonder. What does this have to show me? What is this? I don't understand. This isn't fair. I have no control over it. What is it showing me? And so Spirit wants you to like rephrase that as a question. Because it is crucial, you know, like the system that we're in, you know, the system of like passions and following your passions and producing and making and doing and having and being and knocking it out of the ballpark and every single time, and like, you know, showing up to life and not falling apart and like getting it done and bringing, you know, Spirit says, like, in a world where that is the expectation that is set before you, it's really easy to lose track of where you are in this system that is like rapid fire happening. Your only real compass related to the do, go, be, amazing, got it, is when there's not enough. So Spirit says, like, you know, this everything, like this drive and the do and the go, it has to be broken up by this feeling of alienation, because the system is a system of control, and control is an illusion, and we need to be confronted with that to get anywhere near the vision, which is like kind of the message that we came through this process to learn and find. And it's a message about ourselves, but it's also a message about the whole. And so Spirit says, like, in order for there to be a pause, there has to be an interruption. And so Spirit's saying, you know, like, part of understanding the technology of forgiveness is understanding the technology of unfairness. And unfairness is and crappiness is almost there to interrupt this mythology about who we are, what we're supposed to be in the world, and how we're supposed to get it done. Because this mythology is in opposition to the truth of who we are, because it separates, because it is this system of isolation. And the reason we know it's a system of isolation is because it fails us, and that's where we find ourselves. And so Spirit says, like, this is the technology, you know, this happening, you know, something unfair, something crappy, something beyond your ability to control, something that's confounding. Spirit says that interrupts this long enough for a pause for you to see that this is not the truth of who you are, to be confronted with that. And that's not an easy confrontation, because we're made for relationships, and sometimes this is what we're given in the way of a lesson, and it basically, you know, that's your tower moment. And Spirit is saying, like, you know, there is tremendous burden, you know, in what you're carrying around. Spirit is like showing me, like, each one of these, I have to be the best this, I have to make it doing that, I have to be amazing with that, I have to be amazing with this is needed, if I don't make this much, this is done, you know, all of that. Spirit is saying, like, each one of these wands, like, you have to fight hard for. You have to, like, this is the surviving and the trying to thrive. But you're not thriving if you're carrying these expectations on your back and allowing them to dictate everything through, like, the thought structure of the illusion of control. This is going to be a weird one to post. I don't know who's going to understand this, because I'm going to have to watch this and see what the channels is very intense. But the Spirit is saying, like, I didn't create you to be carrying a burden that, like, anchors you to a version of yourself that is never changing, because that's thwarting the life and death process. You see how this skull is stuck and it's anchored in place by all of these ambitions, accomplishments, and the lack thereof, and what we tell ourselves about who that makes us, that needs to be interrupted because it's not the truth. And so Spirit says forgiveness is the technology of release, and the chaos is really about, it's a teacher. And so where do we find justice in a world that is totally unjust? The bobcat that eats the chicken. Is it fair? So Spirit is saying, like, this process is your teacher. Your goal isn't, the end game isn't happiness. End game is the message, your message. You're the messenger. The saving is in all of us finding our own message and understanding that they're all interconnected. And so, with this teacher card here, looking at the world and saying, the justice is found. This is so much. This is going to be like a 10-hour reading. I feel it. So the justice is not going to be found in the system of control. It's not designed that way. The system of control is designed to make you produce, and it's designed to keep things that you don't need anymore, things that don't serve you, thought patterns, expectations, and keep you from really, like, this is where we see the light and dark opposition. And so Spirit says, like, that, justice is not a fixed position. It's always moving. We're always trying to get towards justice. We're always trying to have justice. We're always trying to find justice. And if you think about the law is always changing and amending. And so justice is a process. And so Spirit is saying, if you look for justice to be like a fixed place that you can get to by like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 steps, and these are the arguments, no, that's not what justice is. That's a system that kind of operates for itself, and for around the idea of control. It's still an illusion. We need it. It's functional, but there's an illusion in terms of how it relates to us as like sentient beings. And so Spirit's saying, look at these situations that are unfair and understand the chaos of injustice is actually a teacher. And I'm just going to take a breath here as Lisa, because I personally find this hard to swallow. Because it's really asking for you to take a high, difficult road. It's a road that takes you out of, like, that person wrecked me, and into a place of, I live in a position of chaos, wherein that wrecking ball forced me out of this position of feeling that I am in control, and into a position where I am finding my way between two worlds, because I am facing my own lack of control and the fear that brings up in me in the way of death. And it's only through doing that we make our way back towards this. And so Spirit is saying, justice is actually a teacher. And so if you expect it to be a dispensation, you're looking at it wrong. And so when something is unjust, you say, what is this teacher? And so Spirit is showing me that's, part of the technology of forgiveness is forgiving the world for being chaotic, and forgiving justice for being a teacher and not a dispensation. Whew. And so when we look at loss and feeling stuck, because it's like, oh, I'm so glad that, this whole process is just about me finding that I am the messenger, the Messiah, and that I'm needed in this way. And Spirit is saying, and that's the third chakra. This is like speaking your truth, having that message, knowing who you are. The message comes from the experience of so many life and death cycles until you find it, and then you free yourself. And when you free yourself with that message, it frees other people. Again, there's just like this chain reaction. And I'm showing the nature shows again. And so Spirit says, like, yeah, a relationship to losses often leaves us really stuck. I've already lost so much. I don't want to, I'm like, this Spirit is saying, you know what the illusion of control does? It convicts you, it hangs you, and it keeps you. And I'm being shown a bug in a spider web that the spider is, you know, putting a, it's not a cocoon, but the spider is trapping the bug in the spider web. And so, you know, Spirit is almost saying, like, you know, we step into the web of losses. And when we don't let go of how those losses happened, what those losses mean, and the injustice of those losses, yeah, it's basically staying in the web of losses and having that web of losses become a part of you to an extent where you're stuck. Because you look at the world and you're like, the world isn't just, it's some craziness, everything horrible happens, there's no control, everything, like, I'm facing my own death, like, nothing's fair, things aren't working the way I want them to. And so Spirit is saying, like, this is a position, this is a trap, and this is the trap of unforgiveness, which is when you let your losses dictate your pace and where you are and where you're standing. And it's really brave to look at your losses and say, I don't serve you, fear of abandonment. I don't serve you. Fear of being misunderstood. You know, you are not my master. I'm not going to be stuck with you. Even if I can't be understood, I'm still walking off of this net, this web. Walking, you know, this is a trap. So Spirit is saying the trap of unforgiveness is like actually staying in the web that you walked into, that glued your feet to a position where you found yourself in a like as prey with no control, and losing quite a lot. And Spirit saying, like, don't get stuck there, because the trick of it, don't get stuck in here. The trick of it is to move outside of the situation and into a solution that says, I'm not meant to be bound by any of the things that hurt me. And the only way to undo that is to accept that I might not get justice as something that's offered to me. It might be my teacher in a really brutal way, because essentially where it's leading me is out of stuck and into an understanding of what my message is, because you find your message when you find your way out of that web. And this is like coming in really, really strong. And that's where we see the third chakra. And so Spirit says, you know, in terms of there's a need for survival that's like so obvious. And, you know, all of this stuff kind of doesn't actually apply on a practical level when it comes to survival. But Spirit is saying, you know, with this understanding of self, with this understanding of the message that you get by living through life and death cycles and coming to know yourself and coming to understand the world in a unique way that only you can see it, that's where we have harvest and prosperity. It's actually like Spirit saying there is a system of justice, but you have to understand that justice is a teacher, and that what that teacher reveals is actually like where you get your vindication, right? That's where you get your vindication, because with that revelation, you've got harvest and prosperity. You get like the life end of the life and death cycle. And you don't want to stay stuck in the death cycle of loss that says, this is what happened to me, and I have no idea how I'm supposed to conquer this on my own. And when you look at justice as a teacher, you're saying, I don't have to conquer this on my own. You know, there's something that is guiding me in a certain way to show me certain things to lead me home. And so when we have the 8 of Cups, which is all about emotional investment, it's also about a narrow view. Spirit is saying, you know, I want you to have clarity about your existence. You know, this life is a blink of an eye, and we're so invested in it. And yes, we should be. It's absolutely essential to the lesson that we be 100% invested, and that we don't think of ourselves as having infinite time to, you know, find our bliss and stay there. Spirit is saying, you know, you got to look at nature and the way that nature works, because that's your teacher. And so, you know, when we're trying to hold on to everything, and we're trying to, you know, keep everything in this tiny little vantage point, when our perspective becomes our God, we're all serving something. And when our perspective becomes our God, you know, this is having to walk away from thinking that you understand. Wow, like this is hard to. Let me, Lisa, the Rita, take a breath. Because Spirit is basically saying, this is the hardest thing this is confronting death. These Eight of Cups this is an investment in who you are as the individual incarnation that you are. To take a broad view and to understand that there's a system of justice that's just a teacher related to the end game, which is when we all kind of understand who we are, we all bring our message forth. That's where you get this awakening. That's a mass awakening. And so Spirit is saying the clarity, the sun, seeing everything really, really clearly, is you first have to walk away from your investment in being right. Because that's the trap of control as well. And so there's not a walk into chaos and forget all the rules. And, Spirit's saying this is, because Spirit's like, you asked me about forgiveness. And I did. And Spirit's saying, you asked me about forgiveness. And when you want to know what forgiveness is, it's essentially trust in a greater system of justice that's a teacher that is going to vindicate you with a message, with something that you learn from it. It's not a destination. And so Spirit's saying, to understand forgiveness is to understand that, to understand forgiveness is to understand justice. To understand the way in which justice doles out vindication is not to think that is not to try and understand it, control it, or even hold it in a fixed position or in a responsible position. Because Spirit is saying, your unforgiveness towards people, it's staying in that web and being like, this spider trapped me here and there's no way out, instead of the knowledge of who you are that gives you this insight to this in-between space when you face the underworld and the structures that tell you who you are break under the weight of it and hold you. And so Spirit's saying, the prosperity, I'm going to read this. The frequency of prosperity supports our feeling of well-being by allowing the inclusion of everything that makes our body, mind, heart, soul, and spirit sing. It invites us to express ourselves in joy and celebration of the abundance and riches that the universe provides. And Spirit is showing me this is like a self-knowledge, and so when you're stuck in the web, you're limiting yourself to the story about how you got stuck in the web. And Spirit is saying, I want you to have this prosperity where you understand that body, mind, heart, and soul and spirit sing, and that the control that the spider even has is an illusion. And all of this is kind of too big for me to really parse down. But Spirit says, your soul responds to a calling, and that's your compass, and you find yourself stuck in these places and it seems insurmountable. And then Spirit's showing me the bug in the little cocoon that the spider made that stuck it to the suffering. As that bug understands it's in a life and death process, and it transcends its position by allowing for whatever justice doles out, because justice doles out freedom sometimes and we just don't know it. Yeah, showing me the bug. This is weird, I'm just going to say it. So, Spirit's showing me this bug is in decay, within this trapped space, on the web, and there's a lot of anger about the unfairness. But Spirit is also saying, the moment that bug lets go of its understanding of survival as being its base motivation, it transcends its body and it moves into another position wherein there's freedom. And that's actually, it's trusting the bigger picture. Justice is a teacher that lets you know that you're I can't even get this out. This is such a hard message. Justice has everything to teach you about the life and death process, which is about the letting go. And it's not about holding people accountable. That's important in terms of the structure of things, but it's not important in terms of how you release yourself from the chains of where the structure of things positioned you. It's understanding the bigger picture, that relinquishing to the lesson often means a completely new life, and allowing that chaos to be part of your vindication. Yeah, this is crazy. So going forward, you know, like in this place of wonder, you know, approaching, got wonder twice, approaching, you know, this life and this opportunity, and I'm showing the flower in the sun and the flower in the frost, doesn't know the difference. It's having a sensation. And so when we remove our judgment and we allow ourselves to look at these sensations without saying this is a good feeling, that's a bad feeling, all of those things are important. But in terms of forgiveness, there needs to be a relinquishing of your sense of being the king of knowing what's good and bad, true and false, fair and unfair. You know, you're part of something much larger than yourself, and it's allowing for the spaciousness of that belief system, that the prosperity of who you really are from a space of wonder. Think about yourself as a child. There's prosperity in every aspect of being 5 or 6 years old. I mean, granted, I've had a horrible childhood. I know that many people have, but you know, if you think about that freedom, it comes from a place of, I don't know and I don't need to know, and I'm exploring. And that's this wonder, and there's a prosperity in that. And so this is the message. It got a little bit long, but yeah. I don't know how comprehensible that is. I don't know how, I have to watch this to even hear what I said, because it came through at such a level. But I hope that was helpful. If it was, comment down below. You probably understand things that I didn't understand as this came through. And if you like what this is, you know, the way in which I read, like and subscribe, that's always a good thing. So I hope you guys have a good rest of your day or night. And that concludes a lesson on not really so much forgiveness, but that forgiveness relies on our trust of a bigger picture, that relies on relinquishing any illusions of control and understanding that justice is your teacher, and that your destination isn't to win, to win every war, to be the best at everything. Your destination is to find out what your message is. And you find that out through suffering. It's light and dark, and it's an interplay. So, you know, it's kind of just a different relationship to unfairness, wherein technology allows us to release into this trust that there's a system there that we don't understand and we don't need to understand. But it's instructing us, it's a teacher, and it's bringing us towards this vision. Whew. All right, that's it. I hope everybody's having a good time, and I hope that was understandable, and I'll see you again soon.